What if Ahsoka Tano was able to turn Darth Vader back into Anakin Skywalker to the light side on Malachor during Star Wars Rebels? Let's get into today's story just right away here. And our story begins right as Ahsoka is fighting Darth Vader inside the Sith Temple on Malachor. She has just returned to the fight and cut Vader's mask, revealing his eye. Ezra and Kanan escape the temple, leaving the former master and apprentice all alone in the collapsing temple. Vader stands up and says, "Ahsoka," in a voice that is more Anakin than Vader. Ahsoka can sense this shift in him, and she says, "I won't leave you, not this time." They stare at each other, and before Vader can shift all the way back into the dark side, the temple completely gives in, falling to the ground. Ahsoka passed out as the tower collapsed, and she was buried under the rubble. The last thing she remembered was landing on the ground next to Vader, and Vader would pass out as well, not initially from the fall, but instead as they landed on the ground, he was already weak, and he used his remaining strength to keep any rubble from landing on Ahsoka. Once she was safe, Vader passed out. And eventually, Ahsoka woke up to the sound of extremely labored breathing. Next to her was Darth Vader, mask now broken on both sides, chest armor impaled by a shard of the temple, and one of his robotic legs missing from the knee down. Ahsoka used her strength to slowly lift them from underneath the destruction, and once they were clear, she gathered any strength left, putting Vader on her back. Her knees nearly buckled in, but after a moment, she used the Force, giving her the strength necessary to do this. She had to keep him alive. She believed in him. Slowly, she walked to Vader's TIE fighter. It wasn't an easy fit for the both of them, but it was a necessary one, and Ahsoka looked back to Vader, mask completely showing his face. She couldn't believe that this was Anakin Skywalker, the greatest of all the Jedi. The chosen one had fallen so far, and he was still out cold, barely breathing. She was taking a great risk by bringing Vader with her. He's become the greatest enemy of the rebellion. No one really knows who he is, because no one lives to tell the tale about facing Darth Vader, except for her. And she could leave Vader here to die, make things easier for the rebellion, but she couldn't do it. The Jedi Padawan inside of her needed to see this through. And eventually, they took off, emerging from hyperspace above the planet Dantooine. The rebellion had many small bases, and this one was very hidden and discreet. It also contained some of the best medical droids and services of all the rebellion bases. Ahsoka flew down to the planet and had to announce her arrival to the rebels so they didn't shoot down the TIE fighter. Eventually, Ahsoka landed, barely carrying Vader again. These rebels knew the name Vader, but none of them knew that this was him, especially with how damaged he was. Ahsoka said that he was a rebel spy inside the Empire, and he needed immediate help. So, medical and surgical droids got to work. They were astounded by the armor on Vader. It was old, immobile, broken, extremely painful to wear, and the droids offered to put the man in better, cybernetic armor, and eventually Ahsoka agreed. She went and meditated into the Force as Vader was repaired. It took a while, but eventually Vader was in a new suit. Breathing returned to normal, and he was placed in Bacta, still unconscious as he fully recovered. And Ahsoka meditated. She eventually had a dream or vision. It was of darkness. It showed Vader awakening, showed Vader destroying. Ahsoka saw the Dantooine base on fire, Imperials pouring into it, and Vader stood over her. He swung his red lightsaber down, and Ahsoka woke up as it cut through her. She got up, running to Vader. It was just a vision, but could he still do this? And Vader had a vision of his own. In the Bacta tank, he saw himself back on Naboo, the grass, the waterfalls. Next to him, Padme, his wife. Padme told Anakin that it was all okay, that he was gifted a second chance to make things right. Padme told him to embrace the light, to embrace Ahsoka. And in the vision, Vader saw Ahsoka behind Padme. They all smiled together, like they used to back in the Clone Wars, before lightning ripped through the vision, burning through Padme and Ahsoka. The laugh of Sidious spread through the vision. It was like he was trying to stop this from happening, trying to find where Vader was. Vader heard the screams of Padme and Ahsoka and ended this dream. finally waking up, breathing heavily. And Ahsoka entered the room to see Vader wake up. His blue eyes made her take a step back. Weren't they yellow or orange on Malachor, she wondered? And his new suit was a combination of old and new parts, something that would need a lot of work, but something that would keep him alive. And Vader lifted himself out of the tank to feel these new parts. He'd figured out a while ago that Palpatine gave him a terrible suit on purpose, and Vader had kept the suit as it forced him to embrace the dark side to survive. Now, he let the new suit work. Walking was easier. Breathing was easier. Swinging a lightsaber was easier. He was not engulfed by the darkness. Seeing Padme in that vision. Padme. And she wanted him to do this for Ahsoka. Vader looked down to Ahsoka. Flashes of memories hitting him hard. The temple on Malachor, saving her from the debris. Flashes of her carrying him to the ship, then to the medical droids. She saved his life. Vader saw the first time they met, fighting together through the Clone Wars, saying goodbye as she went to find Maul. Everything had happened. Everything had happened so fast. And Vader knew what he should do is destroy this base. Destroy Ahsoka. But something in him had truly clicked when Ahsoka saved him, and he had the vision with Padme. She did not have to save him. She took a risk saving him, because she knows who he really is, or who he was, who he can be again. Anakin Skywalker. The two talked for a bit about the next step when Ahsoka had to take a transmission. It was Bail Organa, and he began scolding her for bringing Vader to a rebel base. Apparently, someone here had recognized Vader, and Bail said that he must be arrested or executed for his crimes to the Jedi Order, the Republic, the Rebellion. Then, Bail apologized. Ahsoka understood immediately, ending the call, sprinting back to Darth Vader. And in the medical room, Vader was now surrounded by 20 rebels, weapons ready to fire. One said, "Lay down your weapons, you're surrounded." And Ahsoka could feel Vader's restraint in the Force. And she heard Vader reply, "All I'm surrounded by is fear," clearly wanting to show these rebels who he really was. Ahsoka watched the rebel leader nod to the others, and she ignited her white lightsabers, jumping next to Vader. Blaster bolts filled the air. The Master and the Apprentice deflected every one of them into the sky, and they used a move they used together in the Clone Wars. They each cut a half circle in the ground, meeting halfway, falling together into a series of tunnels. They ran together through the tunnels, emerging next to the starfighters. Both Vader and Ahsoka boarded an X-Wing as the rebels began shooting at them again, but they made it out just in time, escaping the rebellion. Ahsoka was beginning to panic as they flew away, her own men shooting at her, and now escaping with nowhere to go. It was Order 66 all over again. Ahsoka realized the two really didn't have a place in this fight if she was going to be with Anakin, but the fight was all they'd known for years. Perhaps they could return soon, but for now, the two of them had to go alone, somewhere they would never be found, but somewhere they could keep an eye on the war. Ahsoka knew the rebels were building a base on Yavin 4, one of the moons orbiting Yavin, and Ahsoka went to the planet Yavin with Vader, away from the war, but ready to return when needed, hiding where no one would suspect, the planet right next to the moon where the rebel base was. And for a few years, the galactic civil war ramped up around the galaxy. The loss of Vader was a great hit to the Empire. Few knew what he was truly capable of, but one person in particular was angry that he disappeared. Darth Sidious. He knew now that Vader was a failure. Somehow he died or turned back to the light. He could still feel him in the Force, but distant, different. He was always weak, Sidious thought, and he would return eventually if still alive. But he would be ready. Sidious planned to draw him out. He was the hero with no fear, after all, and how better to draw him out than by blowing up the rebel base on the Yavin moon. Sidious boarded a Star Destroyer that would be accompanying the Death Star to the Yavin moon, and the Empire blasted off into hyperspace. The battle above Yavin began as Luke Skywalker and the group of X-Wings took on the Death Star. They had the plans to the battle station, and a plan to destroy it right here and right now, and Darth Sidious watched from his Star Destroyer as rebel X-Wings flew through the trench of the Death Star, clearly aiming for something specific. Sidious laughed as he used the Force to alter the flight of one of the X-Wings, crashing it into the Death Star. The rebels never stood a chance against his great power, and as he prepared to crash the final X-Wing in the trench, he felt the Star Destroyer begin to shake. Sidious fell to the floor, and it was announced that all of the engines had failed. The Star Destroyer was shaking violently, imploding upon itself, and Sidious went with his men to an escape shuttle. Anakin Skywalker stood on his X-Wing in space. Over the last few years, he'd grown his power to a level that he could have only imagined. He tinkered with his suit, making it his own, and became one with the Force. Became the Chosen One, and it was all because of the help of Ahsoka, who also had become much stronger in their time alone, away from the war. But it was all in preparation for this day. Vader looked to Ahsoka, also in a spacesuit, on her X-Wing. The two of them had seen the battle begin from Yavin, and they flew up here. Then they stood on their ships together, and used the Force to twist and destroy each engine of this Star Destroyer. As it began to implode, Anakin got back into his X-Wing, and headed to the trench of the Death Star. Someone was down there. Someone he felt a connection to. And together, he and Ahsoka flew down to help with the Death Star. Vader saw one X-Wing flying alone through the trench, being chased by a large group of TIE fighters. And in unison, Anakin, Ahsoka, and Han Solo arrived to shoot the fighters away, giving room for this X-Wing to take its shot. And Luke Skywalker prepared to fire when he heard a voice, Ben Kenobi telling him to use the Force. And in Anakin's X-Wing, he also heard this voice. Obi-Wan, he thought, talking to someone named Luke. That was what he and Padme wanted to name their child. No, it can't be. Anakin flew down now to help this X-Wing, to help Luke, his son. Luke fired his torpedo, and Anakin guided it with the Force. It entered the exhaust port, and everyone made an escape. Anakin looked over to the exploding Star Destroyer to see a shuttle emerge at the last second. It was clipped by the explosion, and began descending uncontrolled to the forest ground of Yavin 4. He could sense his former master, Darth Sidious, inside of it, and he knew that he and Ahsoka must pursue. Darth Sidious could feel the shuttle shaking and begin crashing to the ground. He tried to stabilize the shuttle, but the pilots were dead, the flight controls were broken. There was no escape from this. The shuttle descended into the atmosphere, and Sidious slowed it with just enough with the Force to stay alive as the shuttle crashed into the ground. Minutes later, Sidious woke up dazed, but he sensed something nearby. He prepared himself for battle as two white lightsabers ignited from the trees. He was waiting for the Vader red, but instead a third white blade ignited. Sidious knew this was Anakin, and his red blade had been purified. The Sith Lord watched as the two of them emerged from the trees. Anakin had a new suit, white and blue, similar to his 501st clone troopers. And today, Sidious thought, he would die like those pathetic clones, gathering the Force around him. And Anakin admired the pure white glow of his and Ahsoka's lightsaber. Together they would get the revenge on the man who took everything from him, from both of them, the man behind everything. And as they emerged, Sidious rose his hands, spitting lightning at the both of them. It pushed Anakin and Ahsoka back, even as they dug their feet into the grass. Sidious laughed in the way Anakin absolutely hated, and Anakin centered himself, then redirected the lightning into the trees surrounding Sidious. The trees were struck and began to fall around the Sith Lord. He blasted them with the Force, disintegrating them. He then floated into the air as Anakin and Ahsoka approached, throwing rocks and other debris at them. Sidious continued his laugh as rocks and branches crashed into Anakin and Ahsoka. Landing back on the ground, he shot a new blast of lightning, but this time, Anakin caught it with his hands. He gathered it, firing it back at Sidious at double the power and speed. Sidious flopped to the ground, skin burned, robes on fire. But he smiled again as Anakin and Ahsoka approached, saying, "Revenge is not the Jedi way." Anakin said, "We are no Jedi," as he ignited his white saber. Sidious's smile turned to terror as he lifted into the air, choking. He couldn't move, and a white lightsaber was sent through his chest. It was over. Anakin dropped him to the ground. he'd finally killed Palpatine. The two of them walked to the opening of the trees, where the pilots of the X-Wings were celebrating. It took Anakin only a moment to recognize his son, Happy, celebrating with Princess Leia and the pilot Han Solo, and Chewbacca, who Ahsoka recognized from the Clone Wars. And Anakin saw R2-D2 with Luke Skywalker, and this made him happier than anything. His greatest co-pilot, one of his best friends, R2, with Luke, his son. And Anakin prepared to go meet Luke, but Ahsoka said this was not a good idea. She was right. The rebellion was winning. The Death Star was destroyed. The Emperor killed. The remaining warlords of the Empire would all fight for power, killing each other in the process. Instead, Anakin and Ahsoka let the rebels celebrate, going off on their own journey. They knew they would not be welcomed right now, that Darth Vader was still the greatest fugitive in the galaxy. But in time, Master Yoda would call to Ahsoka and Anakin through an old Jedi temple, telling them to come to Dagobah. And so they did, eventually reuniting with Yoda. The Grand Master struggled at first to forgive Anakin, but he saw how he overcame the darkness and killed Sidious, something even he could not do. Eventually, Yoda, Ahsoka, Anakin, and the spirit of Obi-Wan would guide Luke to Dagobah, where he would meet his real father, and eventually down the path of the Jedi, helping Luke to recreate his own Jedi temple as the new Grand Master. And that's where our story ends today. Anakin and Ahsoka would kind of hang back as well, eventually just giving in to the Force, dying and becoming one with the Force. Luke, guided by the greatest Force ghosts, build his Jedi temple. So I thank you all for watching today's video. Let me know what you thought. I hope this one does alright. I hope it was alright. I liked writing it. So, thanks a ton. You're all wonderful. We're almost at 12,000 subscribers. Super cool to see, so appreciate you all. And I'll see you in the next video.